Hi everyone. Last night I stayed up late through the entire show to watch the last show of Stephen Colbert, who's going to be leaving the Ed Sullivan Theater. And of course, it has so much history when the Beatles first played there in 1964, the Ed Sullivan Show, and then later on when David Letterman took over. And I have to say, I've always been a big David Letterman fan, and I don't think that Stephen Colbert could touch David as far as his, I don't know, humor and his style and everything. And always liked David Letterman, but I've not really been a big fan of Colbert. I think his humor is kind of forced. I think it's kind of dull a lot, and this was no exception. And I expected it to be a lot better from that angle because, after all, it was a big hoopla and it was going to be the last show. I think a lot of stuff was recorded and maybe not broadcast because this was pre-taped. I knew going into it that Paul was going to be singing "Hello Goodbye." And, it's a great Beatles song, but I was thinking there'd be a little more for an occasion like this. The show started out with some guest cameos throughout the show, but it was people like, Bryan Cranston, Paul Rudd, really. Uh, Tim Meadows, Ryan Reynolds. And, I made the choice to listen to a rather, unhumorous kind of monologue and sitting at the desk talking nothing really interesting. It seemed like an eternity before Paul came out. And when Paul did come out, of course, like a lot of these situations, it was so obviously staged, and it just wasn't doesn't genuine feeling at all. But Paul, it's funny, I really enjoyed seeing Paul earlier, several days ago, when he was on Saturday Night Live. I thought he looked great and sounded great. He still looks pretty damn good for a man who's going to be 84 very soon, on the Colbert Show. But I got to say, it just seemed like Paul. At first, I'm thinking, did they put too much makeup on him or something? And he seemed slightly a little less spry than he, maybe, in my opinion, that he'd been on SNL. I don't know. I thought to myself, wow, what a difference 5 days makes. But so great as always to have Paul there in the flesh. He's still with us. He's still making appearances. He's still able to do all this stuff, and that's really saying a lot. Of course, he was interviewed by Stephen, and the interview, sadly, was much of the same. Again, Colbert talking about the Ed Sullivan Show, what it was like in 1964, and Paul talking about how this is where our influences came from, how, we love the music from here. It's stuff we've heard 8,017 times before. Although, this is the Ed Sullivan Theater, so I understand that they have to discuss it somewhat. And, this is the place. This is the place. Of course, Paul was charming enough, and he did present a nice gift to Stephen. It was a nice, big picture of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in color, which was really nice of Paul to do that. It seemed to me like Colbert interrupted Paul a lot. He asked some questions and Paul's trying to talk, and it seemed like he got in the way, made it about him a little bit, maybe. And it always seemed to me, because I've seen Colbert before, in fairness, I think I've seen better moments with him than this. But you get the impression that almost as if Colbert never even interviewed Paul before. He's never known any of this knowledge. He seemed like he wasn't aware of a lot of things. They did eventually talk about the new album that's coming out. It's coming out on Friday, the 29th of May. It's The Boys of Dungeon Lane, and he did hold up the album, and they did talk about Dungeon Lane, and Paul went into what Dungeon Lane was and who the boys of Dungeon Lane are, and so that was nice. Eventually we got to the performance, and it was a long time coming. I sat through a lot to get to this, and sure enough, Hello Goodbye was performed. Now, there were rumors that maybe Ringo was going to join in for the song Home to Us from the new album. That didn't happen. And Paul didn't perform any songs from the new album, which was really a head scratcher. Again, I don't know what was done that wasn't broadcast. This was pre-recorded. Maybe he did other songs, but to just do Hello Goodbye, I get the idea. Hey, hello goodbye, Stephen, that kind of thing. But I don't know. It was very odd, the performance of Hello Goodbye, because Paul was joined by Elvis Costello, and he was joined by some other people. I didn't know them all. I looked them up. But John Batista. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. The whole Colbert crew wound up coming out, and before you knew it, Hello Goodbye was turning into like a party in New Orleans style, and it just was very odd. I thought. Paul sounded like you'd expect him to sound. You know, he wasn't like he was in 1967 singing this, but as I said in my last video about this, I still was invested and I enjoyed it because this is Paul friggin' McCartney, and it's so great to have him here. So I did enjoy the performance, even though I had to deal with stuff like Colbert singing along with Paul. Please, you know, you don't have to do that. Really, you don't. You know. And that's kind of the deal with it, you know. I mean, I don't know. I thought it was rather lackluster of a show overall, considering the celebratory event itself. I mean, this is like, you know, a big deal. You know, a popular talk show host doing his last show after I think 11 years. It just again, I'm sure there was more stuff that went on behind the scenes or off the broadcast that was maybe more worthy, but a lot of this wasn't really. What can I tell you? They had a little gag at the end, because at the very end of the show, they had, I guess, Colbert and McCartney standing by like a power switch, and it's time to dim the lights forever. Hopefully not forever. We're hoping that something becomes of the Ed Sullivan Theater in the future, but shut down the lights, pull the switch, so to speak, shut the power off. And Colbert was going to do it, and then he said, "Oh, you know what, Paul? Why don't you do it?" So it was very fitting and appropriate that Paul was going to be the one, because he was there with the Beatles in '64, that was going to pull the lever and shut the lights off. And you see all the lights go out, and that's it. You know, that's the end of the show and the theater. But in doing this, I don't think they really thought about it, but in effect, Paul actually shut down Colbert too. He's the one that did it, if you think about it that way. Anyway, yeah, kind of a weird and surreal show, you know, uncomfortable in some ways too, but we got to see our Paul again. Cheers, everybody.